All right, welcome everybody. Today we are going to discuss something really straightforward. So if you don't get this, you've got bigger problems than music theory class. So this is our first foray into form. So form is just sort of the construction of a piece, right? So the overall building blocks of a piece. How is it constructed? We're going to get into this week binary form. Next week we'll do ternary form. They're very straightforward. So binary form is just, as you can imagine, two sections, right? The bi part. You have an A section, and then you have a B section. Usually, in most musical examples, there's a repeat. So binary form generally is A, so your first theme, then repeat, and then B, your second theme, and then you repeat that, and the piece is done. That's binary form. So now, what your assignment is going to be is identifying that. Now, within binary form, there are a couple of small things you need to know, but really it's very straightforward. So, generally, you're going to, the other example that we're going to talk about next week is ternary form. All that means is that there's another A section at the end. All right, so you have an A section, and then there's a contrasting B section, and then another A section. All right, so today we're doing binary, which means there's just an A and a B. And there are a couple of ways that you can hear this. So there are, let's see. So there's closed division and an open division, all right? So if a section of music or just a melody or phrase is closed, it means it ends on the tonic. If it's open, it means it does not end on the tonic. So it ends on some sort of, it's usually has to do with the cadence. So if it's closed, it's going to end on some sort of like plagal or perfect authentic or imperfect authentic cadence, right? So it's going to end on one of these. If it's open, it's going to end on deceptive, which means it's going to like change keys somewhere, or it's going to end on a half cadence. It is illegible. All right? So you just have to determine whether it's closed or open. And it doesn't, generally the very last phrase is always going to end closed. All right, so the B section, 99.99999% of the time is going to end closed unless the composer is doing some sort of crazy 20th century something. So you're not going to run into that here. Okay, so let's see. So what you'll see in binary form is that you'll get two repeated sections that are at least very similar, if not exactly the same, right? So example 16.1, you have, let me grab my violin because I think it'll be easier. Okay, so if you look at section 16.1, we have two very similar phrases, but they're not exactly the same. And that's because you're trying to turn one into a cadence or change the cadence. Usually that's what happens. So here we've got part one. So we'll call this A. Generally when you partial these out there, it's A or B, or if it's almost the same as the first phrase, as phrase A, but a little bit different, we'll call it A prime. Or they'll put a little comma mark next to it, calling it A prime. That's just all that means. So 16.1, we have all right, so it begins in D major. It's pretty clear. Now, part two, the response to this, it's kind of like a con response, is so it's almost exactly the same here, and then it's just moved up a fifth, right? So it goes to the dominant instead of on the tonic. So we have Oh, sorry. All right, and so you add that, it changes a little bit. So the second half, other than going up to the dominant, it's exactly the same. And then the second half changes just a little bit. So it's almost exactly the same. So we call it A prime. It's not, if it's exactly the same thing twice, then we call it A both times. That's all it is. So if we listen to 16.2, which I'm actually going to play a recording for you because that is much more clear than my horrible piano playing, we will hear these two sections of the binary form repeated. Usually you hear it twice. So we have here the Bach Minuet 2 from Partita number 1. I'll include this link so you can hear it again if you need to, but here it is. Okay, one more time. Ready? So here's the A phrase. And here it comes back. It's just a little response. Just a little bit different. It gets repeated. Just a little different. And here's the B section. Repeat. So does that make sense? If you look at it, you have your A section. Da 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 da. Right? And then you have almost the same exact thing. And then he repeats it, and the pianist changes it up, even though Bach doesn't write it that way. Then, when we get to the B section, after the repeat, it's totally different, right? So it's 1, 2. So it's a little bit different. And then finally, so we'll call that phrase B. And finally, at measure 11, we've got a totally different phrase. So we call that C. So it's made up of phrase A, A prime, B, and C. And we just call it binary form. We've got our A section and our B section. All right? That's all it is. If you look at 16.3, Londonderry Air, it's even more obvious. So we've got our A, A prime, B, and then C that wraps the whole thing up. So you've got, and this is just Oh Danny Boy. So that's your first phrase, and it ends on a cadence, right? It ends on that F. So it's a little bit, you don't know what it's going to be. Imperfect authentic. And then we get that ends on a half cadence, right? Right? So it ends on an A major chord, even though E flat's the note that's picked out of it. Okay, and then we get our B section, which is a total contrast to the A section. So that's our phrase B. Now phrase C wraps the whole thing up, and it's completely different. Okay? So pretty straightforward. There's an A section, and then there's a B section. Let's see. Yeah, we get a half cadence, then we've got our perfect authentic cadence, half cadence, perfect authentic. So yeah, it's going to be largely sort of phrased out by identifying cadences and looking for repeats. That's all it is. Let's see, we could go through more of this, but I think it's pretty clear. So if you look at the Haydn Sonata, again, you've got phrase A, and then you've got a contrasting phrase in B. And then this time you get, in the B section, after the repeat, you get sort of a phrase A prime, and then a totally new phrase B. So if you can